Loud music filled the room, mixed with the muffled sound of laughter and conversation. I was standing there, next to acquaintances, holding an empty glass, when I saw him. It wasn't the dancing that caught my eye at first, but the way she looked at him. A smile I hadn't seen for years was on her face. Synchronized, almost intimate movements, so different from the dull dances we'd shared at previous parties. For a moment, I thought it was an illusion. Maybe it was the reflection of the colored lights or the thick smoke that filled the air. But it wasn't. They were there, so close, so connected, that my heart started beating too fast, as if trying to warn me of what was to come. I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was just a friend, someone she'd met that night. But the way he touched her waist, his fingers gently sliding up her dress, the way she tilted her head to laugh at something he said, destroyed me. They were gestures that were too intimate, too personal, to be casual. I swallowed, feeling the bitter taste of what could only be betrayal. My hands were shaking as I held the glass, and my eyes couldn't take their eyes off the scene. Every second seemed like an eternity. The room revolved around me, but my vision remained fixed on them, as if the world had stopped to make me watch in slow motion. They didn't see me straight away. She was so absorbed in him that there seemed to be no one else at the party. It was as if the hall was empty, as if I wasn't part of the equation. My chest tightened, my lungs burned, but I couldn't look away. It was a shock as paralyzing as it was painful. When they finally became aware of my presence, it was as if time froze. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, guilt flashed across the face that had previously worn a carefree smile. He then looked at me, confused and uneasy, but without moving his arms from around her waist. It was like watching a house of cards slowly crumble, knowing that each piece that fell was a part of me that was being torn apart. She tried to pull away from him, but it was too late. It's not what it seems, came out of her mouth. It was such a cliché that I almost laughed, but the pain was stronger. My silence was the answer. What else was there to say? There it all was, confirmation of what I had feared and the start of something much bigger than a betrayal. It was the shattering of everything I believed in, everything I had built. He, on the other hand, didn't say a word. He just stood still, his eyes fixed on me, as if waiting for my reaction, as if his next move would determine the fate of us all. The crowd around us seemed indifferent, continuing to dance, drink and laugh, oblivious to the collapse of a life that was happening right there, just a few meters away. Every second after that was a test of endurance. Her voice, now full of apologies, sounded distant, as if she were speaking through a glass wall. I can explain. She repeated, as if there was something in the world that could justify it. But all I heard was the echo of unspoken words, the weight of broken promises. Heat rose to my face, a mixture of shame and anger. I knew that all eyes were on us now. Maybe they weren't real, maybe it was just my imagination, but I felt every glance like a blade driven into my skin. And yet, I remained still, unmoving, holding the glass so tightly that it felt like it would break at any moment. "Let's talk outside, please," she begged, trying to get closer. The touch of her hand on my arm was like a shock, but not the kind that wakes you up, but the kind that numbs you. I stared at her for a moment, trying to find some truth in her words, but all I saw was despair. Despair at having been caught. He was still standing there, silent. His eyes avoided mine now, as if he feared what he might find in them. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was guilt, but I didn't have the strength to care about him. My focus was on her, on the person who had promised to be there for me, but who was now there for someone else. Why? The word escaped my lips before I could stop it. It was a simple question, but it carried all the weight of my pain, all the frustration accumulated over years of trying, of striving to maintain something that now seemed worthless. Why? She opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out. There was no answer that could erase the scene I had just witnessed. There was no excuse that could erase the image of her in another man's arms. I should have left at that moment. I should have turned my back and left the two of them there, exposed, in plain sight. But something inside me wanted more. I wanted to understand, I wanted to hear from her the reason for such a betrayal. I wanted to see how far she would go to try to justify the unjustifiable. She began to speak, a torrent of disconnected words that seemed more like a desperate attempt to fill the silence. I heard nothing but the sound of my heart racing, as if trying to get out of my chest. Her every word was a blow, every pause torture. He, for his part, remained silent. His eyes never met mine again. Perhaps he knew that nothing he said would make any difference. Perhaps he knew that his presence there was an affront, a cruel reminder of what I had lost. The hall seemed emptier now, even with the same people. I wasn't there anymore, not really. I was stuck in that moment, in the scene that kept repeating itself in my mind. The music, once loud and vibrant, was now just a distant noise, unable to drown out the sound of my thoughts. But the story didn't end there. That night was just the beginning. There was much more hidden behind that dance, much more to be discovered. And as I stared at the two of them, as the silence between us became unbearable, a single question echoed in my mind: what else was she hiding? Welcome to the channel where we reveal the devastating impact of betrayal. Here, we never support or glorify any kind of infidelity. Our stories are fictional, created to show how betrayal can destroy lives, relationships and trust. Get ready for an intense and shocking experience that will make you reflect on choices, consequences and values. Take a deep breath and dive into this impactful story. You're about to experience a real roller coaster of emotions. Good story. The house at the end of the street was the kind of place that exuded an aura of tranquility. With its large windows and well-kept garden, it looked like a picture of a happy family. This was where Daniel and Clara lived, a couple who, at first glance, seemed to have achieved everything: a stable relationship, financial comfort and friends who admired the partnership they displayed at dinners and parties. But, like many things in life, appearances can be deceiving. Daniel was a methodical man. He worked as an architect and had a reserved manner, but not for lack of emotions, he just kept them to himself. He had a detailed view of almost everything, which made him excellent at his job, but sometimes a little distant at home. His world was ruled by logic, planning and the desire to build something lasting, whether in his career or marriage. He loved Clara in a way that he perhaps couldn't put into words. His way of showing it were practical gestures, fixing something broken, carefully planning a vacation or remembering details that Clara mentioned casually. Clara, on the other hand, was full of life. Working as a literature teacher, her world revolved around stories, feelings and nuances. She had an energy that lit up any room and a smile that seemed to invite everyone to feel at ease around her. She loved Daniel, or at least believed she did. Deep down, she sometimes felt that something was missing, but she preferred not to name this feeling, as if facing it would open the door to something she wasn't ready to face. She compensated for this by immersing herself in personal projects and cultivating friendships. Their routine, however, was beginning to look more like a predictable cycle than a shared life. Every morning followed an almost choreographed pattern. Clara made coffee while Daniel read the news on his tablet. They talked about simple things, but the words seemed to lose their depth over the years. It wasn't a lack of love, perhaps just an accommodation that came with time. They rarely fought, but they were no longer surprised by each other. The city they lived in offered a comfortable life, but not exactly an exciting one. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name, and weekends usually consisted of catching up with friends or having dinner at home. Daniel loved these moments of simplicity, while Clara secretly longed for something more. She wasn't sure what it was, but she felt that something was lying dormant inside her. The parties they attended were a snapshot of the social circle they had built together. Clara was always the center of attention, telling stories or laughing out loud, while Daniel kept quieter, watching from a distance with a discreet smile. He appreciated how Clara had the power to brighten up any room, even if he sometimes felt he was just a supporting player in her vibrant life. Despite their differences, the two of them had moments that connected them deeply. They enjoyed traveling together, exploring new places and sharing the experience of seeing something for the first time. Clara loved how Daniel knew how to plan the details of the trips, while he appreciated the enthusiasm with which she lived each moment. These trips were the rare moments when they felt completely aligned, away from the pressures and distractions of everyday life. However, in recent months, there had been something different about their dynamic. It wasn't something that could be easily explained, but they both felt it. Daniel, in his introspective nature, noticed small signs. Clara spent more time on the phone, seemed more distracted, sometimes distant, but he didn't know how to approach it without seeming invasive or insecure. Clara, for her part, felt that there was an invisible barrier growing between them, something that even their deepest conversations couldn't break down. This distance didn't mean that they didn't care about each other. Daniel still made a point of getting Clara's coffee ready every morning before he left for work. She, for her part, never failed to praise his small efforts, even if she often seemed distracted while doing so. They both clung to these gestures as a reminder that there was still something there, even if it was dormant. The arrival of the end of the year brought with it a series of events and social engagements, something that Clara loved and Daniel tolerated for her. Among these events was a mutual friend's big annual party, an event that brought together good music, interesting conversations and plenty of opportunities for Clara to shine. For Daniel, it was just another commitment, but he made a point of going because he knew how much it mattered to her. Preparing for the party was like any other. Clara tried on 3 dresses before deciding which one she would wear, while Daniel waited patiently on the sofa, his jacket already slung over his arm. She left the room beaming, and he, as usual, paid her a sincere but restrained compliment. "You look beautiful," he said, and she smiled, even though she knew he said it every time. Still, there was something in his tone of voice that made her believe it. At the party, Clara soon mingled with the group, while Daniel found a quieter corner to watch. He enjoyed watching Clara interact, seeing her be so natural and charismatic. It was as if she was in her element, and he was proud of that. But that night, something was bothering him. It was a feeling he couldn't quite put his finger on, a restlessness that grew as time passed. Clara, on the other hand, felt strangely light. There was something about the energy of the party that made her forget, even for a few moments, the monotony of her routine. She danced, talked and laughed as she always did, but there was a different intensity to her movements. Something that perhaps she herself hadn't noticed yet. As Daniel watched, a thought crossed his mind: how long had it been since they'd had moments like this together? When was the last time they had laughed out loud without worrying about the weather or what would happen next? This thought took him by surprise, and he found himself imagining what it would be like to talk about it with Clara later. The party continued to be lively, the lights twinkled and the music pulsed. For Clara, it was an ordinary evening, a chance to reconnect with friends and feel alive. For Daniel, it was the beginning of a feeling that he still couldn't explain, but which was already beginning to form the first cracks in his vision of stability. What they didn't know was that that night would be a watershed. A series of events was about to be unleashed, changing everything they knew about themselves, each other and the relationship they believed they had. And as the music played and the laughter echoed around the room, fate began to write a new chapter in their lives, one that neither of them could have foreseen. That week began like any other. Daniel immersed himself in his projects, adjusting drawings and resolving technical issues in silence. Clara, on the other hand, alternated between classes and the literary events she loved so much. Both were busy, too busy to notice that something bigger was brewing, something that would change everything. That Thursday morning, Daniel decided to work from home. There was a particular project that required absolute concentration, and the office, with its constant interruptions, didn't seem like the ideal place. Clara had left early, excited about an all-day literature workshop. He watched her walk out the door with a smile on her face, carrying a bag full of books, and something inside him warmed for a moment. There was a comforting simplicity to the scene, as if everything was still in the right place. But the peace he felt soon dissipated. At midday, while he was going over plants on the living room table, something caught his eye. It was Clara's cell phone, forgotten on the sofa. She rarely left her phone behind, and Daniel thought about sending her a message to let her know, but hesitated. She'd probably be busy and wouldn't be able to come back for it. Still, a nagging curiosity made him pick up the device. He wasn't looking for anything. He just thought he'd leave it on silent in case it started ringing and distracted him from his work. Then a notification appeared on the screen. It was a message from an unnamed number, but the message preview made his heart stop for a moment, looking forward to another night like that. You were amazing. The initial shock paralyzed him. His mind tried to rationalize what was in front of him. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was someone's bad joke. He forced himself to believe it, but before he could help it, he unlocked his cell phone and opened the conversation. What he found was like a blow to the stomach. A string of messages that left no doubt. They were intimate, passionate, charged with a desire he hadn't seen in Clara for a long time. Messages exchanged weeks ago, detailing encounters and feelings he didn't even know she could have for someone else. Daniel felt the weight of his body sink into the chair. The air felt heavy, hard to breathe. Every word he read was like a stab wound. He stood up, dropping his cell phone on the table as if it could contaminate him. He needed to think. He needed to understand how something like this could have happened, how Clara, his Clara, could hide something so devastating. The next few hours were a blur of fragmented thoughts. He tried to concentrate on his work, but the drawings in front of him now seemed meaningless. The cell phone was still there, like a shadow of what he had discovered. He thought about confronting her immediately, but something stopped him. He wanted to understand more. He wanted answers before he even asked the questions. When Clara returned home that evening, Daniel watched her with an intensity she didn't realize. She was beaming, telling him about the workshop, laughing at something funny that had happened. He responded mechanically, unable to keep up with her lightness. He felt like an intruder in his own home, carrying a weight she was still unaware of. The following days were a test of endurance for Daniel. He began to notice details that he had previously ignored, her excuses for going out alone, the moments when she seemed distant, the laughter she shared over the phone. Every little detail now seemed to confirm what he had discovered, but he still needed to see for himself. It was then that an opportunity arose. On Friday evening, Clara mentioned that she was going to a dinner with friends from work. Daniel watched her get ready, choosing a dress he hadn't seen for ages, applying her lipstick with a care that seemed unusual. He watched her leave and felt his heart squeeze, but this time he decided not to stay at home. He got in his car and decided to follow her. Accompanying her through the city was a mixture of anxiety and disbelief. Clara drove to a restaurant in the center, but instead of meeting her friends as she had said, she went in accompanied by a man. A man Daniel didn't know, but who was now impossible to ignore. He saw them go in together, laughing like accomplices, and a wave of anger ran through his body. He stayed in the car, watching from afar, unable to believe what he was seeing. It was real. It wasn't paranoia or a misunderstanding. Clara was betraying his trust, his love, everything they had built together. Their dinner seemed to last an eternity, each minute amplifying Daniel's torment. When they finally left, the scene was even more painful. He followed them to a nearby hotel, where he watched them disappear through the entrance. That was it. There were no more doubts, no more room for excuses or rationalizations. Everything he had feared had come true before his eyes. Daniel returned home that night with his mind at boiling point. He wanted to scream, break something, confront her immediately, but he knew that none of that would change what had happened. He sat on the sofa, staring into the void, trying to find a way to deal with the devastation he felt. When Clara returned later, she found Daniel awake, waiting for her. The look on his face made her hesitate in the doorway, as if she sensed something was wrong. "Did you have a good night?" he asked, his voice firm but restrained. Clara tried to answer, but something in the intensity of his gaze made her stop. It was as if he knew, as if he was seeing right through her. And, for the first time, she realized that Daniel's silence could be more terrifying than any scream. The night had only just begun. And what Clara didn't know was that Daniel was already ready to face whatever came next. The night was cold when Clara finally arrived home, her steps hurried as she walked to the door. Daniel watched her from the dark hallway, his breathing controlled but his heart beating fast, as if he was about to face something he already knew was inevitable. He saw her enter, and her expression was instantly wary, as if she felt the weight of the silence he was carrying. She stopped in the entrance hall and stared at him. Her loose hair fell softly over her shoulders, but the light in the house seemed stronger on her than ever. Her smile, which had so often lit up the house, was absent. He could see the marks of tiredness on her face, but also a sense of guilt disguised under a mask of normality. "You took your time," said Daniel, his voice calm, but there was something behind it, a tension that she immediately recognized. Clara hesitated before replying, as if trying to find the right words, but there were no words that could undo what was about to happen. I was with friends," she began, her voice hesitant but soon sounding firmer. "It was dinner, Daniel, that's all." He didn't answer immediately, just watched her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. He knew what had happened. He didn't need her to say anything more. The words were on the tip of her tongue, but nothing could hide what was there between them, like a chasm that widened with every second. "Clara," he said, interrupting the silence between them. "I know what happened." She stiffened, her eyes widened and the smile she was trying to maintain disappeared. She tried to disguise her surprise with a nervous laugh, but she couldn't. His gaze was imperturbable. His gaze was imperturbable, cold, as if he had already buried the pain and was just waiting for the right words for the confrontation. "I know," Daniel repeated, his voice firmer now. "I know about dinner, I know everything." He paused, giving her time to react, to deny, to defend herself, but nothing came. What he had seen, what he had known, there was no hiding it. Clara looked at him, her eyes now watering, but she tried not to give in. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice wavering, trying to keep control of the situation, but no longer believing her own words. She knew the end was there, as close as the pain forming in her chest. "Don't you know?" Daniel smiled, but it wasn't a smile of relief. It was a bitter smile, full of deep sadness. "You were with him, weren't you? The man you've been meeting at night, the man you betrayed me, Clara. Not with one, but with all those years of trust that you've destroyed." Clara felt the pain of the words rip through her chest, as if each syllable were a blade cutting into her flesh. What she had tried to hide no longer made sense. The weight of her own secrets, of her own choices, was stamped on Daniel's words. "Daniel, please," she tried to approach him, but he pulled away, not allowing her to get any closer. His eyes were fixed on her, but their glow was different now. There was no longer that warm love she knew, nor the silent trust that had always been the foundation of their relationship. Now, there was only the pain, the anger that he could no longer hide. "No, Clara," he said firmly, without an ounce of hesitation. "Don't touch me. I can no longer listen to your excuses. I can no longer be the man who accepts what you've done." Clara felt her stomach turn. It was a feeling of shame, of despair, something so deep that she didn't know how to deal with it. Her hands were shaking and, for the first time, she realized that she had lost control. Fear began to take over every cell in her body, but she needed to speak, she needed him to understand, she needed to somehow reverse the situation. I regret it, Daniel," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I got carried away. It wasn't planned, I didn't want it to happen. I loved you, I still do, and I don't know what happened." He watched her in silence, waiting for her to finish, but his eyes kept shining with a contained anger, an anger that he had been harboring for so long and which was now finally being released. He didn't want any more excuses, no more empty promises. "Don't you know?" he said, almost harshly. "Don't you know what happened? You went after him, Clara. You sought him out, you gave yourself to him. And, worse, you let me believe that everything was fine between us. You tricked me into believing a lie." Her voice was lower now, but the venom of her words still echoed in the house. "Daniel, I didn't mean to," she began, but couldn't finish. The words seemed to have no value anymore. She knew what she was seeing, she knew what he was feeling. But then Daniel did something that took her by surprise. He took a step back and sat down in the chair next to the table, looking suddenly exhausted. "I've given you everything, Clara. I gave you my love, my trust, my time, my life. And you destroyed it all with a single mistake. You've gone further than I could ever have imagined." Clara stood there, paralyzed, trying to comprehend the extent of what she had done. The regret that invaded her was deep and visceral. But in the midst of it all, there was something else. Something she couldn't understand. Something that was emerging in Daniel's gaze, something he was about to reveal. I never cheated on you," he said suddenly, his voice calm but charged with a tension she still didn't understand. "But you knew that. You knew I loved you, you knew I was faithful. I just didn't do something for you that you wanted so badly, Clara." She didn't understand right away. "What are you saying?" she asked, her eyes confused. He looked at her intensely, as if he were preparing to expose everything. "I didn't cheat on you, Clara. But someone did. And it was because of me." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara looked at him, perplexed, not knowing what to say. His words were sounding strange, but he had spoken with a cold clarity, as if he had been waiting for a moment like this to reveal something even deeper. What Daniel didn't know was that the secret he had just revealed was not yet the worst. The worst was about to happen. Clara took a step back, as if the weight of Daniel's words had physically hit her. The silence that settled in was suffocating, but she knew she had to break it. Something in his tone, in the intense gaze he now carried, indicated that this wasn't just about her betrayal. There was something bigger, something she couldn't understand. "Because of you?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "What do you mean, Daniel?" He looked up, his eyes fixed on hers, as if deciding whether to continue. There was a mixture of pain and determination in his expression, a clear reflection of someone who has carried a burden for too long. "Clara, I failed to protect what was ours. I didn't see the signs in time, and by the time I did, it was too late." She frowned, confused. "Protect? What are you talking about? That doesn't make sense." Daniel took a deep breath, the weight of his next words seeming to crush him. "The person with whom you betrayed me, Clara, it wasn't by chance. He didn't come into your life by chance." Clara blinked rapidly, her heart racing. "What are you talking about?" "He was just someone I met. He had nothing to do with you." Daniel shook his head, his expression hardening. "Do you think it was a coincidence? That he just appeared out of nowhere? He knew who you were, he knew about us. He was using you, Clara." Those words echoed like thunder. Clara tried to process, but her mind seemed unable to comprehend. "Using? No, Daniel, you're making things up to justify your anger. It doesn't make sense." "It does make sense, Clara," he said, his voice low but carrying an unwavering firmness. "He knew exactly what he was doing. I found out more than just his messages. I went after him. I found out who he is, who he works with, what he wants. And yes, Clara, he was manipulating you, to get to me." Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. His words didn't ring true, but there was something in his tone that made her hesitate. Why? What would he have against you? Do you think it's all about you? That's crazy, Daniel. Daniel laughed, but it was a bitter laugh, laden with a pain she had never witnessed before. You don't understand, do you? He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that getting close to you was the quickest way to destabilize me. He wanted to destroy what we had built, Clara. And he succeeded. That's not possible, Clara murmured, her voice barely audible. But deep down, something began to stir. Little details, moments that she had previously ignored, began to make sense. The way he knew so much about her life, about her routines. The occasional questions about Daniel, which she had previously thought were just curiosity. But, why? What would he get out of it? Daniel stood up, the abrupt movement almost making Clara flinch once more. He began to walk around the room, as if the words needed movement to be released. Because he wanted to destroy me, Clara. Because he wanted what I had. For months, I've been fighting it. He was a direct competitor on a project. He knew he couldn't beat me professionally, so he decided to attack me personally. Clara felt her legs go weak. She gripped the back of a nearby chair, trying to keep her balance. Are you saying that it was all a game to him? That I was just a tool? Daniel stopped and faced her again, the pain evident on his face. Yes, Clara. That's what he did. And I couldn't protect you from that. I couldn't protect what we were. His words tore a hole in her chest. The guilt she was already carrying was now almost unbearable. I didn't know. He never said anything. I didn't know, Daniel. If I'd known, if you'd known, would it have been different? Daniel interrupted, his voice heavy with emotion. Would you have chosen another path? Or was that just an excuse for something you were already feeling? Clara swallowed, but had no answer. Everything she felt seemed to merge into a mess of guilt, shame and anger. I made a mistake, Daniel. I know that. But, what you're saying, is so much bigger than I imagined. He laughed again, but this time there was something softer about it, something almost resigned. It is, Clara. It is bigger. Bigger than both of us. But what matters now is what you choose to do with it. Because I've already made my choice. She blinked, surprised. What do you mean? I've finished the project, he said, finally sitting down again. I finished everything he thought he could destroy. But, Clara, that doesn't change what happened here. Between us. Clara felt tears burn her eyes. She knew he was right, but admitting it was almost impossible. I didn't want to lose you, Daniel. Even when everything happened, I never wanted to lose you. He watched her for a long moment, his expression soft but distant. Maybe you've already lost me, Clara. Maybe we lost each other before all this began. The silence that followed was overwhelming. And deep down, Clara knew he was right. What they had built together now seemed so fragile, so distant. And she didn't know if she would ever be able to repair what had been broken. The silence between them was heavy, as if the words that had not yet been spoken were hanging in the air, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Clara remained motionless, trying to process everything she had heard. Every piece of that revelation seemed to tangle in her mind, making any attempt at logical reasoning difficult. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed to have reached a kind of resignation, even though it was clear that the pain was still present in his eyes. He stood up, slowly crossing the room while his mind seemed to wander down a path of its own. Clara tried to speak, but the words escaped her. She didn't know what to say that would ease the devastation that hung over them both. He didn't just destroy what we had, Daniel finally broke the silence, his voice low and controlled. He destroyed the image I had of you, Clara. That hurts more than anything. Clara felt the tears run down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. There was no disguising what she was feeling, the guilt seemed to be soaked into her skin. Daniel. I never wanted this. I never wanted to be the person who would hurt you like that. He stopped and stared at her. His eyes, now dark, seemed tired of fighting something that had already taken over his heart. And yet you were. Clara hesitated, feeling the weight of those words. She knew there was no justification for what she had done, but that didn't make it any easier to deal with the enormity of the damage she had caused. You don't understand. I was lost. I felt so disconnected from everything, from you, from myself. He came along at the wrong time, and I made the wrong choice. I'm not saying this to justify it, but to try to explain it. Daniel shook his head slowly, letting out a long, tired sigh. Explain. His voice carried a tone of incredulity. Do you think that changes anything? That putting pretty words on top of this mess can fix what's been destroyed? Clara lowered her eyes, unable to hold his gaze. She knew he was right. There was no explanation that could repair what had been broken. But she still had to try. I love you, Daniel, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Even now, after everything, I still love you. He laughed bitterly, the sound resonating through the room in a way that made Clara shrug. Love? He repeated, almost mockingly. If that's love, then maybe I've misunderstood what it means. Those words hit her like a blow, but Clara knew he had a right to anger, to resentment. Still, she couldn't give up. She couldn't just let everything fall apart without a fight. Daniel, I'm willing to do whatever it takes, she said, her voice heavy with emotion. I know I made a mistake, but I want to make it right. I want to fix us. He was silent for a moment, looking at her as if trying to decide whether those words were worth believing. Finally, he shook his head again. I don't know if there's anything that can be fixed, Clara. I don't know if we're still the same people we were before all this. Clara felt despair growing inside her, but forced herself to take a deep breath. Then give me a chance, at least. A chance to show that there's still something between us worth saving. Daniel sighed again, rubbing his temples as if the conversation was draining his last reserves of energy. I can't make that decision now, he said finally. I need time. I need space. She nodded, even though it was destroying her inside. She knew that insisting further at that moment would only push the possibility of reconciliation further away. I understand, she said, her voice breaking. I understand. The next few days were a test of endurance for both of them. Daniel began to spend more time away from home, often leaving early and returning late. Clara didn't know if he was at work or simply trying to escape the tension that dominated the home. She, for her part, tried to fill the time with trivial tasks, but nothing seemed to work. The house, once a refuge, now seemed like a minefield, full of memories that she couldn't avoid. The nights were the worst. Clara often found herself staring at the empty side of the bed, where Daniel should have been. When he finally returned, he would often lie down without saying a word, and the silence between them was deafening. But even in this silence, something began to change. Daniel began to observe Clara more closely, as if trying to see something beyond the surface. He saw her crying alone in the kitchen one night, her hands shaking as she held a cup of tea. He realized that, even in her pain, she still made small gestures to take care of him, like preparing the coffee every morning, even though he rarely thanked her. And Clara, for her part, began to notice things about Daniel that she had previously ignored. How he still folded his clothes carefully before putting them in the washing machine, or how meticulously he organized his papers on the office desk. Little things that she had taken for granted for years, but which now seemed to carry a much greater weight. These observations weren't enough to erase what had happened, but they began to create small cracks in the wall that had built up between them. They both knew that there was still a long way to go, but for the first time in weeks, there seemed to be a possibility, however remote, that path could be walked together. That evening, while they were both sitting in the living room, Daniel finally broke the silence. "I've thought a lot about what you said," he began, his voice low. "About wanting to put things right." Clara looked at him, her heart racing. "And I don't know if it's possible," he said, sincerely. "But I'm willing to try. Not for us, but for who we were. For the people we once were." She felt the tears come again, but this time there was something different about them. It wasn't just sadness, there was hope. "Thank you, Daniel," she said, her voice shaking. "Thank you for giving me this chance." He nodded, but didn't smile. There was a lot of work to be done, a lot of wounds to be healed. But, for the first time, there seemed to be a light, albeit faint, at the end of the tunnel. They both knew the road would be difficult, but at that moment, they were willing to try. The following months were a mixture of trial and failure, with Clara and Daniel caught in an emotional roller coaster that oscillated between the effort to rebuild something and the constant reminder of what had been destroyed. Each small step forward seemed to carry more weight than they could bear, while the setbacks brought back the doubts and hurts that were never really buried. Daniel began to go out more, finding refuge in his career and the new opportunities that arose. He had accepted to lead a project in another city, something he would have turned down before so as not to get away from Clara, but now it seemed like a necessary escape. Clara, on the other hand, immersed herself in her routine as a teacher, trying to find work as a distraction from the holes left by her relationship. One evening, after another exhausting day, Daniel came home to find Clara sitting in the living room, surrounded by papers. They were photos, old letters, and notes that the two of them had exchanged over the years. She looked at him with tired but determined eyes. "I don't know how to move on, Daniel," she said, holding up one of the letters. "I read these and remember how we were, how simple it was. And now it feels like we're so far away from that I don't even know if it's possible to go back." He approached slowly, feeling the weight of the situation. He sat down on the sofa, but kept a distance that seemed to be a reflection of the invisible barrier between them. "I don't know either, Clara," he admitted. "I'd like to believe that we can rebuild something, but sometimes I wonder if we're just clinging to what's already dead." She bowed her head, silent tears falling as her hands trembled. "I lost you the moment I chose that path," she said, her voice breaking. "And I don't know if I can live with that." Daniel sighed, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his expression was softer, but still filled with a deep sadness. "Clara, perhaps the greatest punishment for both of us is exactly that, knowing that there was something good, but that we let it slip through our hands. I don't hate you, but I don't know if I can love you in the same way." His words were like knives, but at the same time they carried an honesty that Clara knew she needed to hear. She nodded slowly, trying to accept that sometimes reconciliation wasn't possible. The silence between them was broken only by the sound of the hands of the clock, marking the time that seemed to drag on. A few days later, Daniel made a decision that had been maturing. He agreed to relocate to another city, something that meant making a fresh start, away from Clara and the memories they had together. Before he left, he called her to talk one last time. "I don't want you to think this is about punishment," he began, looking her in the eye. "I just need a fresh start. Maybe away from here, away from all this, I can find a way to be happy again." Clara didn't try to convince him to stay. She knew that his actions had led to this decision and that insisting would only prolong the pain for both of them. "I hope you find that, Daniel," she said, her voice firm despite the obvious pain. "You deserve it." As he walked out the door for the last time, Clara felt an emptiness fill the house. It was an emptiness unlike the silence they had shared over the last few months. It was final, and she knew it. Life continued differently for each of them. Daniel found in the new city not only a new purpose in his career, but also a chance to reconnect with himself. He met someone, a woman with whom he didn't have to hide his pain and who somehow helped him see that there was still room for love, even after so much disappointment. It wasn't an easy process, but it was a necessary one. Clara, on the other hand, plunged into a journey of self-discovery. She started going to therapy, something she had always been reluctant to do, and began to confront the issues that led her to look for something outside her marriage. It wasn't a linear path, but she knew she needed it to become a better person, for herself and for those around her. Years later, they met by chance in a cafe. Daniel was with his new partner, and Clara was alone, but seemed calmer, more at peace. They exchanged glances and, for a brief moment, they both smiled. It wasn't a smile of complete happiness, but of acceptance, of recognition that, despite everything, they had survived. In the end, they both learned that not all love stories end like fairy tales. Some end in lessons, in farewells that are necessary but no less painful. Daniel found a new beginning, and Clara found herself. And, somehow, that was enough. Comment below on what you thought of this story. Your opinions and reflections are always welcome. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Remember, the channel does not support any kind of betrayal. Here, we show how choices can change lives irrevocably. Thank you for following us to the end.